There will be, it's a perfect articulation with Professor Wong Lee. Thank her for coming today and presenting. Professor Wong Lee is professor at Chinese University of Hong Kong, and you're at the Faculty of Education, and you specialize on social stratification and education. Thank you very much for your talk, and the title of your talk is Social Stratification and Social Mobility in Hong Kong since the 1997 Handover, Changing Opportunities, More Equality, ? Thank you very much.
So first of all, let me thank Eric and Professor Patterson for having me here. Today I'm going to refer to some census data and relevant statistics and two mobility data sets to answer some questions. So basically, today's presentation is quite factual in the sense that I want to give you an overview of what's going on since Handover in the system of social stratification in Hong Kong. So what changes are there? And then I would like to ask, well, the changes in social stratification actually means that there are changes in opportunity structure for you to get mobile. So if the structure is changed, so I would like to ask whether the distribution of opportunity for mobility is equally distributed or unequally distributed. So that's basically two questions I would like to answer. But we need to base on some evidence before we can really answer the question. So let me just show you some figures. So when we talk about opportunity structure, basically we can refer to census statistics in terms of the distribution of working population by industry and distribution of GDP, so that you can see what sort of industries are growing, what sort of industries are declining, and this kind of gives you some idea about what kind of jobs people can obtain in Hong Kong. And we can also look at the occupation, the distribution of working population by occupation, because we sociologists are interested in the social position of people, but usually when we say social position, we refer to their class position, meaning that their occupational position. So, and employment status, so let me just refer very quickly what's going on. So very briefly, you can see that if you look at the working population by industry, right before the handover to 2016, manufacturing sector is kind of declining, where basically the primary industry has been declining. And you see some new industries emerging, like information technology or some sort of services. So this is how we look at it. And if you look at the GDP distribution, similar picture emerged. So basically you can see that there's an increasing service sector for so-called pink color occupations. But if you look at occupations, well, I will come back to this occupation later on. So you see that the working population by occupation. So basically you see the proportion of managers, administrators, and professionals. This is what we call middle class, remains more or less the same, just 17%. But of course, if you count associate professionals, then the class will become bigger. But then we can discuss whether we should include associate professionals. And then kind of consistent with just what Stan said. If you look at elementary workers, this sector actually is expanding a little bit. That means more people are actually working in that sort of that kind of jobs. And if you look at working population by employment status, it's quite interesting because the proportion of employers has been declining. And of course, well, basically the majority of the working population is employees. And only some of them are self-employed, but you may wonder why you've got more self-employed people here. I suspect that it's something to do with the MPF scheme, the sort of fake self-employed people being there. But anyway, you see basically most people are employees, and not many of them are running their own business. So based on this data, I would like to raise some theoretical issues. If you look at those distribution as a Weberian, I'm not a Weberian, but if you take a Weberian approach, is Hong Kong a class society? Weber would say, well, we classify people's class position according to their occupations and employment status. So basically, you see, most of them are workers. Oops, sorry. Go back. I can't. I don't know how to go backwards. Yeah. Okay, I'm going back. That's good. Yeah. So most of them are working as a worker, but just give you a little bit background information because it is reported that there is a middle class, the so-called first generation of middle class was emerging in the 1980s. So my question is, or sociologists would be interested to know whether that middle class is expanding or consolidating. But apparently, I just show you the proportion. Well, of course, you can question how this statistics is collected and the coding system as well. But still, I would say if you just look at the classification by the government, still we don't have an expanding middle class. We just have basically more or less the same proportion of people being called middle class. But then there's an implication for democratic movement or social movements, because if you look, refer to some modernization theory or some political theory, middle class people are kind of seen as the agents of change or agents of democratic development. But then now you see they're not growing, they're not consolidating, so there's some implication. But then my question, another question is, of course, if you count associate professionals, then this class is expanding, but then are they really middle class? Well, we have to look at the employment relationships. Are they hired on a steady basis? Can they see a very promising career ladder in their organizations? Would they see a constant increase of income over their life course? So in a sense that we can kind of engage in that kind of debates to see whether the middle class in Hong Kong is expanding. And then it would have some implications for democratic discussion. But if you take the Marxist approach, then you may ignore that sort of occupation distribution, but focus on more distribution of wealth. That is just like at the very beginning of Stan's presentation, talking about the property, who owns the means of production and who don't. And apparently, we don't have an expanding middle class. I'm not sure whether it is shrinking or whether it is weakening, but we can say, if you look at the Gini coefficient or the rising prices in estate property, if you look at these two figures, then you may kind of give support to the Marxist approach in understanding the stratification system in Hong Kong. In a sense that, well, we're not, our society is not like what Weber described or Weberian would like to describe. It's not like a gradational system, but it's kind of more relational. You have two opposing camps. one who owns everything and the others owns basically nothing. But of course, we cannot discuss whether, which approach is more convincing in making sense of the system of social stratification in Hong Kong. But apart from this kind of theoretical perspectives, so-called layperson's perspective, we will just look at income or some sort of medium income by industry and occupations. And my picture is quite similar to what Stan's just presented, because we both refer to census data, that's why. If you look at the pay, basically the pay doesn't go up very quickly. It was frozen actually for like 10 years, if you take an average. But of course, it's doing quite well, apparently, over the last few years. So it's kind of increased to 15,000 now. But then you have variations across industry. Well, that's not the major discovery. For me, the major discovery is about the income by occupation. You can see that the pay for managers, administrators and professionals, that means show middle class, increased rather drastically over the last few years, although it was also frozen for some years. But now it's kind of more nearly double. But if you look at if you look at the class, so-called middle range occupations, the rate of increase is not that great. Basically, they remain more or less the same, or increase just a little bit in 2016. And I think elementary workers are doing poorly. You can see that they don't earn much. Basically, they just earn $1,000 more than like 20 years ago. So in a way, if you look at just social positions, then you see kind of static picture. And if you look at income, the scenario is kind of more worrying. My observation. So basically, you see some dying industries. So basically now Hong Kong is not a manufacturing economy, it's no more. And basically we are just a growing economy in the service sector. But then we're still not entering the information age if you look at the GDP distribution. Basically only 3.5% of GDP constitutes, the information technology industry basically constitutes only 3.5% of GDP. So we are still, we're predominantly a service economy. And if you look at the pay, basically the reward structure is getting more polarized in the sense that you got high pay, high skill jobs like professionals, managers, administrators, very, very good jobs, so-called socially desirable jobs. You've got them, but at the same time, you also got low pay, low skill jobs. And apparently, those middle range, in terms of skills and pay jobs, are kind of shrinking. This structure actually posed a very challenging opportunity structure for so-called young people, that basically pose challenges to everyone, but it's kind of more alarming for the young people, because if you want to get mobile, you want to get ahead against this structure, you have to rely more on your qualifications, apparently. And maybe you have to prolong your educational career if you want to get a so-called socially desirable job. And actually, this kind of suspicion or speculation is consistent with figures shown in education, like the qualification of people of Hong Kong has been increasing over the years. We've got more degree holders, although it's not great, just 22%. No comparison with our neighboring societies like Japan, Korea, Taiwan. But still, it's already double the proportion we had in 1996. And if you look at the labor force participation of the young people, actually you can see from these figures, they entered the labor market at a high age. That means they actually spend more time in education because they, well, if you want to get so-called socially desirable job, you have to have a higher qualification. And that's why, well, some people would say mobility in Hong Kong for young people has been blocked. And people even suspect that that's the reason why young people get so vocal or even come out to the streets to protest, although they say this without any ground. But when your mobility is blocked, so sociologists would say, well, probably young people would turn to alternatives. You turn to alternative mobility channels, such as self-employment. So in a way, we sociologists would see self-employment as a buffer zone in an unequal structure. But then, from what I've seen, well, I would like to give you a little bit more background information because when I did my PhD many years ago, there were like 15% of the populations being self-employed. But nowadays, you've only got less than 10%. Basically, only 3.5% of small employers or employers. That means a lot of people have to become employees. But self-employment, actually, there are two views on it. Self-employment is usually seen as an alternative for those people whose mobility is blocked. And it's also an alternative for those risk-taking people. They want to become entrepreneurs. They want to bring in their skills and money and making something new. So this is how we see self-employment. But given the situation in Hong Kong, apparently, a decreasing number of working population is in the self-employment sector. That means, basically, if you want to get mobile, or if you want to get ahead, you have to rely on more institutionalized mobility channels, such as education, instead of like becoming a small employers, running your own business, something like this. Especially like if you refer to the hawkers policies, I think another speaker is going to talk about this. Like basically the government is giving out a decreasing number of licenses for hawkers, and the cost for running a small business is going up in Hong Kong now because of high rent. The operating cost is very high now. You have to pay for a very expensive rent, and then you have to pay for the MPF and the minimum wages of your staff. So it kind of makes it more difficult for people to become self-employed, even if they want to take it as an alternative path to become socially mobile. So this is basically what I want to show. This is the change. These are the changes in social stratification system. That means this is the system against which people get ahead. But the next question is: are people enjoying an equal opportunity for social mobility? So now here I refer to two mobility data sets. One is done by Hong Kong University in 1989. And the other one is done by the Hong Kong UST by Professor Wu in 2007. So basically, these two mobility data sets could show the mobility pattern at two different times in Hong Kong. Well, there are some limitations of using these data sets because they only refer to men. And if I want to make the data set comparable, I have to ignore women in 2007, although Professor Wu had collected data on women. But anyway, it still gives you some ideas about the situation in Hong Kong. Well, I won't go into the technical details, so don't worry. I will just show you some very general figures, like if you just look at the mobility rates. Mobility means that people just move away from their social origin, their class origin. By class origin, we refer to the person's father's occupation. So you kind of move away from your father's place, something like this. So basically in 1989 and 2007, the proportion of mobile people is more or less the same. So if the governments, or if people really believe that there's no mobility for young people, that's why they get so radical, it's not true. You've got mobility. And actually, you've got more upward mobility in 2007 than in 1989. So it's kind of surprising, right? But of course, this kind of change could be due to changes in mobility structure, just like what I just referred to, because the system of social stratification had changed. So that means people just move around, okay? Although you also see that the number of desirable jobs are actually remains more or less the same. All right, so more people become mobile, but it does not immediately lead to the conclusion that people have opportunities to get ahead, because we also look at how these opportunities for mobility are distributed across class origin. And well, here, the technical details is just too much. I just show you, I fit 3 models to this data. And the first model doesn't fit, because the first model says the class destination and class origins are not related to each other, which is not true. It does not describe this data, the data types. That means our destinations, where we are now, are actually are related to our class origin. And what is kind of shocking to me when I run this model, yes, people now have more mobility opportunities, but the mobility opportunity actually is more strongly reliant on one's class origins. That means if your father is a doctor, is a lawyer, is a professional, the chances for you to get mobile, to get a good job, basically, is much higher than a person whose father is just a worker, if I can put it this way. And it's also more difficult for people to become self-employed in 2007 because you have a shrinking self-employment sector. So these figures, you can pay attention to this one, 1.3774. Actually, it says that now Hong Kong, it becomes like 37% more unequal, if I can just tell you the interpretation of the figures. So that means, yes, we have more mobility, but mobility is also more reliant on one's class origin. So it's kind of more polarized. And the mobility path is more limited in a sense that in the past, we would have this sort of legends, like the rich legends like Li Ka-shing, you're coming from a very humble origin and then you get rich because of the talents and because of your hard working, your effort. But it's not like this now in Hong Kong. You basically have to rely on education. There's a very strong link between qualification and your first job. And in the past, even when you don't have a very good first job, you could still have this so-called counter mobility. We call counter mobility. Well, you don't really need to understand what it means, but it means that you can enjoy career movement, basically. But now in Hong Kong, it's not true. Basically, your mobility is determined right after your graduation. So it's strongly linked with your qualification. So when you take account into the mobility patterns and the stratification system, that means actually the number of desirable jobs is not increased. The number remains more or less the same. So more people are competing for these jobs, and people coming from a better off background have a higher chance of getting this kind of socially desirable jobs. Basically, this is the picture. And when education becomes so important, that means mobility becomes so institutionalized, then the focus should be on education if we really want to understand whether people still have a chance of getting upwardly mobile. Well, I won't go into details of the education policy, but I just want to highlight two policies: the direct subsidy scheme schools, the direct subsidy scheme, basically. And I want to show you these figures. After the introduction of the DSS scheme, DSS, when you have more DSS schools, I compare the class background of the student body over the years by using PISA data. Well, I'm not running the PISA data, but I just refer to the demographic background of those students. You can see that in 2006, you don't have many direct subsidy scheme schools, but still the distribution, you can see that they've got a high proportion of students coming from a higher socioeconomic state. Oh, sorry. And for government schools and subsidized schools, basically the distributions are more or less the same, like 1/3 from each. And international school, you can guess that most of the students are coming from a very well-off background, which is expected. But over 12 years, after the schemes has been implemented for more than 10 years, you can see that the distribution of students by class background has changed quite a lot. Now 65% of direct DSS schools, 65% of the students are coming from a high SES background. So it's a drastic change. The increase is about like 20%. And they draw students actually from government schools and subsidized schools. So now if you look at the subsidized schools, the distribution has changed too. So this is one thing. The other thing is higher education. Basically, our chief executive has been saying that she's going to do a lot on education in order to provide young people with more opportunities for higher education. But basically, we only have one path, one academic path. Although they have, you could do an associate degree or you could do a higher diploma. But still, most students want to do it in order to get into university instead of getting these degrees as a terminal degree. So in a sense, we don't have much change in our higher education system. We only have, yes, we have more universities now, we have more degree programs, but then you also have an emerging educational hierarchy. And if you look at the subsidies or the financial support by the governments to students, actually there's not much change. That means, although you don't increase the tuition fees, still, nowadays the competition is not about getting a degree, but you have to consider which degree, from which institute, from which program, and whether you have the chance to do internships and exchange programs. And all these involve money. Like at my university, a lot of students have difficulty in finding enough funding to join an exchange program. So in a sense, the battlefield is changed to the higher education, and the format of social competition is also changed. It involves internships and exchange programs as well, not only your GPA. So my conclusion, very, very quickly from all this factual or evidence, over the last 20 years since Handover, our economy hasn't been changed that much. Basically, we are still a service economy. We are not entering information age. And our society is still a class society, but we haven't become an affluent middle class yet. We actually are, the middle class is still more or less the same in Hong Kong. If you look at the proportion of elementary workers, actually it's expanding. And I hope there will be some work on so-called working poor later on, because even when you have a lot of, our employment rate actually is quite high. But it doesn't mean that people earn a lot. If you look at the income, actually it has been frozen or even reduced for some years. So a lot of people are working, they're having jobs, but they are living poorly. The quality of living is quite alarming in Hong Kong. So I expect to hear some report on the poverty in Hong Kong. Well,